So there's 3 reps. So you have, and I don't know exactly how the lines are cut up, but you have Representative Thomas Hall. Yeah, and then you have Representative Jennifer Gross, and then you have Representative Sarah Carruthers. So those are the 3 reps in this area. Now, if you ask for the senator, my apologies. I do not know the senator that represents this area.
I know a lady who was on the bus. She lives in Cincinnati. She might be willing to come. I know her husband's kind of ill, you know, she's up in age. She was actually on the bus, so they went down south. I just haven't met her.
Just Ruby?
Can't remember her name right now. I met her once, and I didn't even know it was her until she left, and I went out to get a car, and then her husband told me.
Oh, really?
She
Not
said,
the same one.
yeah, he's still living.
You know, in 2019, I went on a pilgrimage. We went to Alabama, we went to Mississippi, and we went to New Orleans. And it was life-changing for me. You know, one thing I will say is I do not take for granted the little things in life. Because I know for a fact there are those, even currently today, who wish that they were able to enjoy certain luxuries that we have, that we honestly at times take advantage of. And what I learned on that pilgrimage was that, you know, history at times can be uncomfortable. You know, people want to try to stray away from it. You know, we have to learn from it, and we have to build off of it. You know, it is the stuff that I seen on this pilgrimage. We went to the Lynch Museum, we went to the Civil Rights Museum in Mississippi, and then we went to the Whitney Plantation in New Orleans. And just being in that environment,
Yes.
you know, just taking it all in. I remember we went to the Lynch Museum, and there was not a dry eye in sight, because when you seen what our ancestors had to come through, you know, and then you start looking at the ages. Some of them should still be here today, if you really think about it. But that is one of the driving forces of why I do what I do. Because, you know, society isn't fair, but it could be fairer. You know, they say life isn't fair. You know, things don't always go the way that you would like it to go. But when I look at some of the issues and problems that we all deal with, it makes you think, like, come on now, we can definitely have a higher quality of water in this community over here. We can definitely have more grocery stores over here. You know, healthcare, hospitals. You know, why is it that I have to go across town to get medical care when there was a hospital here, now it's gone? Just things to think about. I didn't mean to go on a tangent like this, but it all comes together. It all, you know, it all comes together, and you know, we got a lot of work we got to do. We have a lot of work that we have to do, and we must continue to keep on pushing on. So, does anybody else have any questions? Well, I appreciate you all so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I gave all of you my card, so please stay in touch. And you know, if there's anything that I can do, I'm here for you, because guess what? Even though you didn't vote for me, I still work for you. So thank you so much.
We've done something for us. Okay, and out of this, the opportunity for us to really expand, and I really appreciate you coming, brother. And was last year, he was going to come last year, and he came down ill. So this time he was able to get in here. So this is something that we'll be calling on you.
Yes.
Yeah, because the question was asked to me earlier, what was the connection with the schools, right? Novella?
Yes.
He was asking me what do we have going on there. So the superintendent had contacted me with her regrets that she couldn't come today. So we've been in touch with the principals, and So finding out if they are listening, and we'll just keep moving this forward. So at this time, if you would, I'd like to bring the representative, what you tell me, 20 plus years at the Freedom Center
Yes.
in Cincinnati, Underground Railroad Center. Novella, what's your last name?
Nemo Black.
Nemo Black.
Yes.
All right. There she is.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate this. Like you said, that the Freedom Center opened in 2004, August of 2004, and most people want to know why would they put the Freedom Center downtown Cincinnati between the Bengals Stadium and the Red Stadium where the party is happening at. But it's very important where the Freedom Stadium is at. The Freedom Stadium is right across from the Ohio River. The Ohio River was called the borderland. It separated the slave states from the free states. Ohio was a free state by one vote. One vote made Ohio a free state. So that tells you a couple of things, that either the people that lived here before us, they either profit off of slavery in Kentucky or they just didn't care. So Ohio was a free state in 1803. But the reason for the Freedom Center being right where it's at, it was called Little Africa. That's where free African Americans lived at. Where the Bengals Stadium at and farther down was Little Bucktown. 5th Street on down was Big Bucktown. 3 African American communities living and working across on the free side of the state, but working on the river. And the jobs were pigs. Our nickname for Cincinnati is Porkopolis because of the running of the pigs. Procter & Gamble would come and get the fat off the pigs, and they used to put it in ivory soap. That was the reason for ivory soap floating back then, and the pig fat was a moisturizer for our skin. We're glad that they didn't use other moisturizers now. But the reason for that is also the Irish. Any immigrant that has come to America has faced racial persecution. When the Irish came over here, they thought everybody coming from Ireland were all criminals. So they put them down in Little Africa with us. Now in 1804, they made black laws because there were so many African Americans living in Ohio. And Ohio is the biggest underground railroad network there is. So, but those black laws stated that if you lived in Ohio, you had to have freedom papers. At that time, freedom papers were $500. In today's money, that's about $5,000. If you wanted to work on the river killing the pigs, you had to have a work permit. That was anywhere from $50 to $100, depending on who you had to go for that permit, because you know people had their hands in their pockets. If you had children living in Ohio, you paid taxes on those children, 25 cents per child. The Irish did not have to do any of that. So Cincinnati had 3 large race riots because of that, because they didn't have to have that. And so we have the stories. We talk about how Ohio did not, the Ohio River, which is owned by Kentucky, by the way, but was named by the Native Americans that lived in this area. And so Kentucky's so close, and they didn't put a dam in the Ohio River. So back then, during enslavement time, the river during the fall and the winter, when enslaved people escaped because they left during the fall and the winter because the nights were longer and the days were shorter. Some places in that river were so low that a person of my tall stature could actually walk across that river, or it would be completely frozen. That's why Ohio became the biggest underground railroad network. Now, depending on where you crossed and how you got here in Cincinnati, you can meet somebody that would send you to Indianapolis, going to Canada. You can also meet somebody sending you to Ripley, going towards Columbus, going towards Cleveland. Nobody went the straight shot. Now, the term Underground Railroad actually came from Ohio. Ripley, as a matter of fact, there was an enslaved person escaping across from Kentucky. His master saw him cross the river and go up Ripley. There's a big hill that Ripley stays on. saw him go there, and he went behind him and went knocking on the doors. Everybody's like, I ain't seen nobody look like that. Nope, I ain't seen nobody look like that. So he had to go back without his property. And so when he got back, they said, well, what happened? We know you was with them. We saw you behind him. And he said, I don't know, it was like he disappeared underground. And so they started using that term, Underground Railroad. And so when the enslavers, the bounty hunters, the paddy rollers, whatever you want to call them, when they started hearing that Underground Railroad, first place they go to is the railroad tracks. Now, most people think that the tunnels are big, because I've had people come in and say, well, you know, we got a tunnel in so-and-so and so, and we played in it and we walk in it, and I'm saying, can you notice it? Yeah. You can see it? Yeah. Then it wasn't on the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad meant secret, a hiding place, hidden in plain sight. So if you can see it, it wasn't on the Underground Railroad. When we talk about tunnels, there are some areas in Cincinnati that had small tunnels, but the biggest area that I know that had tunnels was Springboro, Ohio, because all of their houses were on Main Street, and they still have 28 houses today that house the Underground Railroad, anybody that went through there. And they had tunnels, but these tunnels were little crawl spaces. So you had to crawl in them. And the reason for Springboro having that, it was a Quaker town. Jonathan Wright had an African American that lived with them that knew how to read and write. Jonathan Wright, who's the founder of Springboro, also had a mill. So any enslaved person coming through there, they could learn how to read and write from that man that lived with them, and we don't know his name, or they could work at the mill, so when they went to Canada, they could have had money. And if you know anything about the geography of Springboro, Lebanon sits here and Franklin sits there. Both places where paddy rollers were going. And from what the history that I've learned is that everybody knew the sound of a horse back then. So if they knew a strange horse coming into town, they would ring a bell and they would get every enslaved person that wanted to seek freedom out into those tunnels and back out into the woods. So we have so much history today that now I'm responsible for, at the National Underground Railroad, for forming the Underground Railroad Committee. And as I was talking to Mr. Blackshear, next year, because each area that has Underground Railroad in Ohio is doing their own thing in September. The National Park, the Underground Railroad Committee for the National Park, wants us to get together and bring everybody in under one umbrella for one big celebration, although everybody can still have their celebration, but for the whole state to recognize the rich history that Ohio has in the Underground Railroad. So we're looking for more names. We're trying to, my job is to research and to find Underground Railroad networks throughout Ohio, join them together, figure out who helped who get to where and all of that and how they got to Canada. Well, you know, a lot of people, we talk about Miss Harriet Tubman. She was great, but most people don't know why she was great. Harriet Tubman worked with her father. Her father cut down wood, cut down trees. Harriet Tubman cut down trees. Her father was the one that taught her about the stars and about plants. Harriet Tubman was also a healer. That's how she was able to take children with her. She would take plants and she would give it to the babies and would knock the babies out. So that's the reason why the babies didn't cry. Another big, I call her our first feminist, Miss Sojourner Truth, Isabella Bonfrey. Most people don't know that Isabella was from the North. So what her father did, her father was almost 7 feet tall. Back then, that was unheard of, you know, unless you were in Africa, because people didn't have the nutrition here that they had back then, so people didn't grow. But her father was 7 foot. Miss Sojourner Truth was about 6'2". And Miss Sojourner Truth was tall and she was very, very slim. So she didn't have the attributes that a lot of African American women had at that time, if you guys know what I'm talking about. So, her poem, Ain't I a Woman? She did that here in Akron, Ohio, because she came here to speak on women's behalf. So when she came to speak to a lot of white women. The white men said, that's not a woman, that's a man. Y'all ladies, take her back there, since she's gonna prove that she's a woman, take her back there and undress her. So they stripped Miss Sojourner of all of her clothes to prove that she was a woman. Now this woman was so bad that the speech that she had wrote down, that she had formed in her head that she couldn't write, she didn't do that one. She did the poem, Ain't I a Woman? And what that poem said, I can cook and I can clean and I can work in the fields and I can work like a man. But after all of that, I am still a woman. And so we have those stories on the Underground Railroad and plenty of other stories that are survivors of, and those that people didn't survive. The biggest story in Cincinnati was the story of Margaret Garner that escaped with her husband. And I'm sure everybody here knows that story, right? No? No? Okay, Margaret Garner. She was born in Maysville, Kentucky. No, I'm sorry, Richmond, Kentucky. So her father was George and her mother was Priscilla. They were listed in the census as being black, which means they had dark skin. Only 2 people plus the owner, John Garner, lived on that plantation. Margaret was born, she was listed as mulatto. It means that she was mixed with white blood. So who was the father? The owner. Margaret was looked at as being very, very beautiful. The age of adulthood that time was 12 years old. When you turned 12 years old, you were considered to be an adult. And I want you to put that in mind because I got another story to tell you about what's going on. So, but anyway, her mother decided to marry her I'm sorry, and I said John Garner, but his name was John Gaines. So the owner of that plantation was John Gaines, and Priscilla, and then was Priscilla and George Gaines. Well, when Priscilla married her daughter to Robert, his name was Gardner, and so that's how Priscilla became Gardner. So Robert was looked at in the census as being black, so he was dark skinned. Margaret's first son she had was Robert Jr. He was listed as black. Robert loved horses. And so John Gaines decided that he was gonna go into politics, sell his property to his brother who had just lost his wife and her baby because she fell down the stairs. And his name was Archibald. Robert was a great horseman, so Archibald Gaines and whoever Robert's owner was got together and they hired him out in Covington, about 25 miles from where they lived. That means that Robert stayed in Covington. He comes back home, Margaret's pregnant. She has a son, Samuel. He's listed as mulatto. Robert's been gone for over 8 months. It's not his baby. He sent away again, and every time he sent away, Archibald remarries again, and his wife is pregnant. So 3 months before she is supposed to give birth, they send Robert away. Because the only time a woman could say no to her husband was in her 3rd trimester. So, but when that white woman said no to her husband, she also gave him permission to go elsewhere. And so that's why you find that once that white woman became pregnant, somebody in that field or in that plantation would come pregnant. So Robert is gone again. He comes back, and Margaret is pregnant again. She has a girl, Priscilla. He leaves, he comes back, Margaret has another girl. Her name is Mary. They say Mary is the spitting image of Archibald Gaines. He loves Mary, that's his heart. Robert is sent away again. He comes back, he finds Margaret pregnant. He says enough. It's the winter, December 31st, 1854. He goes and gets the best slave, the best horses, gets his mom and dad, gets Margaret and the kids, and they're gonna run to Cincinnati because Margaret has a cousin that is free. And he lives in Little Bucktown, right by the Bingo Stadium. They're going there. By the time they get to Covington, Ohio, it had started snowing. It was so cold and the horses were tired. Robert loved horses. He left them in Covington. The Ohio River was frozen. Kids didn't have no shoes on. They carried them and they walked over that river into Little Bucktown. Her cousin's name was Mr. Kite. He was supposed to get Levi Coffin, king of the Underground Railroad, to take them in their Boss Bottom wagon to Canada. By the time he got to Mr. Coffin, he told him, he said, well, where are they at? I thought you was bringing them with them. No, they're at the house. He said, are you crazy? Archibald is gonna know exactly where you guys are at. Go get them and move them and I'll be on my way. Well, he comes back. Archibald find out they're gone. He goes straight to Mr. Kite's house. Robert sees him out there. He starts shooting. Margaret sees him out there. She goes at it. She goes and get a butcher knife. She takes young Mary. She cuts her throat. They grab the knife. The mother-in-law grabs the knife from Margaret, and she goes get a shovel. And she goes after Priscilla. They get the shovel from her. She went after her daughters first. Why? Not that she didn't want them to be slaves. What happened to her and her mother? She didn't want that for her daughters. So instead of going back into enslavement, knowing that her daughters would be raped like she was, she wanted to kill them. So, in the state of Ohio, if you got caught running away, you had 1 hour to find a white man that could identify you as being free. 1 hour. They arrested her, not for killing her baby. They arrested her for running away. Her and her whole family. Biggest trial in Cincinnati history. People from all over the world came to wonder why a woman would be so desperate that she would take her child out instead of letting them go back into enslavement. This trial lasted over 3 weeks. Lucy Stokes, an abolitionist, they wouldn't let women talk at the trial, but at the break, she looked at Margaret, who was with her head down, didn't say a word, but her kids were all under the table. And she looked at the men and she pointed to them. She said, the faded faces of the Negro children tell too well the degradation that the Negro woman has to suffer. And if this woman thought that it was better for her to take her child's life in order to see that child go through the same woe, who's to say she didn't have the right to do so? People got quiet in the courtroom. In the end, Margaret was found guilty of running away, her and her family, which means that Archibald Gaines get to take them back. But the city of Cincinnati wanted to retry her for the murder. That's what they said. But actually they thought any woman willing to take out her own children deserved to have freedom. They wanted to send her back. Archibald knew that. He grabbed Margaret and them and he took them back over into Kentucky. Nothing for Cincinnati to do. He was so upset that he decided that he was going to sell Margaret to a cousin in Tennessee. He put Margaret on a steamship. She had just given birth to another baby girl. They said the steamship collided with another steamship. Margaret and the baby fell off. They got Margaret out, they couldn't find the baby. She was sold to a cousin. Robert was allowed to come see her because he found out she was dying. She had caught typhoid fever. Before she died, she made Robert promise to never marry unless he got out of enslavement. She died at the age of 24, having 5 children. They found Robert after the Civil War, and the only person that he had with him was Robert Jr. and Samuel. We never could find out what happened to Priscilla. But these are some of the things that happened during the time of enslavement. Some of the stories that we forgot to tell, that we're beginning to tell. We want people to understand the history so it won't be repeated. Now, when I said the age limit was for an adult was 12 years old, I want you to imagine, if that was the case, every African boy that they brought over to America that was 12 years old and older was a warrior. Something to be feared by the white man. And those are the ones, they ran away because they did not have to have the babies at 12 years old. That's another reason why women were dying in childbirth. They weren't women, they were children. So when you think about it, these boys are running away. They're hiring men out there and they're calling them patty rollers. And you catch them and you bring them back dead or alive. It is easier to bring back a dead body than it is a live body. So they was bringing back those dead bodies, and you would think, well, why would they want a dead body? Because they can hang that dead body up for 2 to 3 weeks and point to them each and every day. This is what happens when you run away. It's a scare tactic. So now, fast forward, the Civil War is ended. Those patty rollers are now policemen. And they train other policemen. Bring them back, dead or alive. I want y'all to get that. So this is the beginning of why there's still the police so violent and they rather shoot first than ask questions later, because they have been afraid of the black men from 12 years up since the time we came over here. And we need to let our boys and brothers know why they are being targeted. They're afraid. If you move, they don't know what you're going to do, because they know that that warrior spirit is still in our black men today. It has not left. So, I talked a lot.
Good stuff.
So those police officers, they weren't born back there, so somebody trained them and
Yes,
taught them that
police
knowledge.
officers train police officers. And it's always been the good old boy. We're not gonna try to catch them because we know they're gonna run away. We know they're gonna fight back. So instead of doing that, shoot to kill.
Now, I never learned a lot about Ohio, just mainly Virginia. You hear about people escaping to Virginia most of the time.
Yeah, I'm from Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Virginia was, well, because that's where the ships were coming in. Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And it's another thing, when they went to Africa, contrary to what they're being told now, they went to places where we knew how to grow rice, where we knew how to grow cotton, because that was grown in Africa, where we knew how to grow sugar. All of that was grown in Africa. Africa is called the motherland because it's the beginning of time. If you look at an old map of Africa, you'll see all of Africa being encompassed with Europe and all of those. That's connected. But they don't want to tell you that. They want to tell you that Africa is a big continent. Most people don't even forget that Africa is a big continent. But they had little countries in it. Angola is a country that grew rice. So in all of those people that they got from Angola, guess where they put them at? In South Carolina, Georgia, not where the swamps were at. So they were strategic into going into Africa and raiding Africa and taking people out for what they needed to make America rich.
Commodity.
Commodity. Yes.
Now, I went to the, Magnolia Plantation in South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and, when they taught us, when we were there, they actually grew something else, but then it changed to rice, cause they had that water
They
there.
they had all that water.
Mhm.
Yeah, and rice, you know, when we talk about the enslaved people going down south, it's because cotton didn't become king. They thought enslavement would end a long time ago until Eli Whitney went down south and saw the women trying to pick the seeds out of the cotton. A cotton ball is so tight, and in that cotton ball are cotton seeds. It's about 20 to 30 seeds in a cotton ball. One cotton seed will make 100 plants. And so there's only a short period of time that they had to pick cotton, the end of August to the end of September, or maybe a week or two in October, depending on how the weather is. So once you pick the cotton, and a child 6 years old was put in the field to pick cotton, 6 to 12. If when you were 6 to 12, you had 50 pounds bag that you picked. Once you turned 12, you became an adult, you had a 100-pound bag. So once they pick all the cotton, then they had to take it to the barn, and women tried to pick out the seeds. It was so tedious that women were trying to comb it, you know, to spread it out. Now, Mr. Eli Whitney came down here, and he thought that he was gonna make people's lives easier. He saw the women trying to comb that cotton out. What does he do? He goes back up north and he invents the cotton gin. What does the cotton gin do? It combs the cotton out.
Seeds fall out, yeah.
And the seeds fall out. So once again, they take something that we have done and they use it for their benefit. And cotton became king. A bale of cotton weighs 480 pounds. We have pictures of ships with 700 bales of cotton on it. That's how much cotton we were picking during that time. Our children through adults, taking over 700 bales of cotton over into New England and other places.
Where are all the mills?
Yeah,
Then with me.
yep. So, any more questions that you have for me?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Some of the stories that I've read about coming up the river and just getting to a location here is called Todd Hunter Road. It's the highest spot coming from Cincinnati, coming up to Great Miami. So that spot, one of the stories was about this man named Pug Munsey. And they asked him why was he wanting to live up on the highway. He said, so I can see if anybody's coming. And that way we could go in. So Todd Hunter Road really is the high point coming from the south, from Hamilton up to Middletown, and then it levels off, and this is the high ground here. So what I want to share now is the original African American settlement in Middletown, Ohio. I heard you talking about how these stories and all that, but this is one story that we'll see what it says. It says a mythical railroad, which African Americans used before the Civil War across Ohio in their fight for freedom, became known as the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad had begun in Ohio as early as 1815 and grew until the 1840s when it was providing transportation facilities for hundreds and thousands of lives. Ohio had more stations than any other state, and homes in southern Ohio were stations on the route. One was that of Dr. Andrew Campbell in the center of Middletown on the northeast corner of Broad and Central. Northeast corner, Broad, Central. Just the land we're on now is where that house was here in Middletown, Ohio. Campbell was a Middletown physician who owned a large home where there was room in both the large loft and cellar to hide fugitives, and it was only 1 block west of the Miami-Erie Canal. Miami-Erie Canal, 1 block west. Both Campbell and his wife, the former Laura Reynolds, were ardent abolitionists. Middletown was one of 3 major routes across Butler County. One ran by way of Cleves to Hamilton, north to Dartown, and west to Oxford. Another ran up through central Hamilton County to Hamilton, Ohio, and on to West Elton, which was a major station, while the other one came through Middletown, usually by way of the Miami-Erie Canal. Few considered the canal as an important escape route of southern fugitives, but W.H. Siebert, in his book on the Underground Railroad, wrote, "The towpaths of some of our western canals form convenient highways to liberty for a considerable number of self-reliant fugitives who were considered safer than other roads." The towpaths of the canal. Towpaths were often through heavily wooded town lands, and the swishing of the water and the clip-clap of the horse's hoofs easily alerted those along the path. It was easy to step off and hide among the trees and underbrush until the boats passed on. Once on a towpath, runaway fugitives knew they were on the trail of freedom, with the Miami-Erie's terminus being Toledo. Between 1830 and 1860, an estimated 40,000 fugitives crossed Ohio, few being caught. The original African-American settlement in Middletown, dating back to 1820, centered around North Main Street, 2 blocks over, Broad Street, right behind us, right here outside the door, and First Street, now called Columbia. Right past the city building. It's the big building, as you look out the window back there, is where Columbia was. The historic, the original African-American settlement in Middletown dating back to 1820. It was stated that there was a station on the Underground Railroad as a place of refuge for those escaping slavery. Some arrived by canal boats, some came by foot along the towpath. The Miami-Erie Canal, now the path of Verdi Parkway. Right here, that path. Okay? So now we're looking at why and what. Why abolitionists were here in Middletown. So they were ardently against the slavery. Quakers, Presbyterians, Methodists, that whole group, but you also have free Negroes here. There was a historic 2.5-story brick house and had been constructed by John Peterson and was the only masonry house in the area. Longtime local reference librarian and talented artist Pat E. Brewer donated a painting of the Underground Railroad House to the Canal Museum, where the work is on permanent display as part of a local African American exhibit. The Historical Society is right behind us, going up to the city building. It's open on appointments now. The original house was 30 feet wide, going back 18 feet, standing on a 45-foot lot. Sometime after construction, a wooden 1-story addition was made to the back, standing 25 by 27 feet. The Georgian home had side-facing gables with a high-pitched roof, making for an unstable attic, or a usable attic. A good thing there was hiding place for fugitives. So where we are would be that law, would be that upper house. The Georgian home had side-facing gables with a high-pitched roof, and when I picture that, and I look at this building here, I'm like, wow, this is the second floor, it's a high pitch, and then we have the basement downstairs. So all of that is not this building, but this building is sitting where all that was. So as we do this research, as we share this knowledge, we can picture, and there is a drawing, a painting that Pat Brewer did. Through the years, it would undergo even more changes before being torn down in the 1950s. When the lot was cleared to make a way for a one-story business building. In 1959, a sheet metal business opened. An old city pictorial map of the 1870s indicates that the homes surrounding the brick structure were small, white frame structures, usually one story or a story and a half. These modest homes were owned by middle-class African Americans who served the community in many ways. Two men, Richard Armstead and Thomas Miller, were longtime employees of the U.S. Hotel, the first building built on Main Street. It still sits there. U.S. Hotel, you worked at, but you wouldn't bar. It says here that they were longtime employees of the U.S. Hotel, where they operated the town's leading barbershop. Others, such as George Davis, worked at a livery stable as a hostler. Simon Hawkins was chef at the U.S. Hotel, with many black women working as assistant cooks there or others as maids. Some black women served as domestics in the homes of the wealthy. Other women were on their own, providing catering services or, like Martha Merritt and Mary Armstead, operating a laundry with pickup and delivery service. Sarah Mitchell provided laundry services for many decades, becoming one of the best-known citizens. Black folks, downtown Middleton, right here where we are now, free. Along First Avenue was the Bethel Chapel, the African American Episcopal Church. It had been organized in 1867 by Rachel Hunter. Again, straight down this past the city building. We saw that church when we was growing up, where black people lived, up this end of town. Its first meetings were held in the homes of its members, and then the new Oddfellows Hall on South Main Street. In 1875, a church was constructed under the pastorate of Reverend Richard H. Morris. Mrs. Hunter continued her long support of the church, and in 1906 was honored by being chosen to burn the mortgage. Located at 311 North Main Street, near the historic house, was the Colored Building and Loan Association. The Colored Building and Loan Association, which was organized in the early 1900s with Thomas Taylor F. Howard as president and the Reverend B. Whitney Clark as vice president. African American son, downtown Harrison. So, you asked a question about the school system, and then Willis spoke about the move in the country to stop teaching black history. When we were growing up, it wasn't taught in school, but it was taught at home. It was taught at the church, and you can go to the library and get books. So our goal, or my goal for Middletown right now is, as a friend of mine find these things. I've been researching, since 2011, 2010. And it all came about when I was, walking the streets, walking Verity Parkway one day. And the park is up across from the Canal Museum, Lakeside Park. There's a monument with the names of the 14 black families that lived on North Main Street, right there across from the Canal Museum. So just stimulating the curiosity that has happened for the canal people. Okay, it's listening to their zeal right now to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the groundbreaking for the Miami-Dade Canal. A big thing that's being talked about to do. So as I listen, and you know, we're talking Underground Railroad, the land. But now, canal history is big talk, because they're looking to really make this thing big. So we look at the canal started here in Middletown, went south to Cincinnati, Music Hall. Okay, then from Middletown to Dayton, then from Dayton, Pickle on up to Toledo. So all of this network is there, chronicled. I went to a lecture the other night at St. Clair Community College. This man talking about the black settlements in Ohio. It shows different things, and I had to ask him at the question that I asked him at the end was, why was he laughing so much when he was telling this history about slavery in Ohio and the abolitionists and all these slaves that were here that were enslaved in Ohio? And so some people in the audience said, well, sometimes people laugh to cover their feelings. It was painful for folks to hear this information. And so what you said was, we have to tell our story. And hopefully when we have that opportunity, share it with you. And Russell, you can see it later on. We had a curriculum for the teaching of the Underground Railroad in Middletown City School District. It was put together in 2007. And so, but the teachers have the option, if they want to use it, they can use it, like history. So here we have, this has been good. We heard from Willis Blackshear, state rep, about pretty much why he did what he did. Now we've had you share some stories. So it's just these kind of things are what we're trying to do. Last year was the beginning, and we got a video. We had videos from last year, and now we're streaming again this year. So we're just praying that we continue to do what we have to do. And our goal, or my goal, is that we get connected to the National Park Service so that we can become a partner in the network of freedom. So now we made this connection. Appreciate you. Looking like people that we know. Home folks. So it's a good thing. I was informed later, latter part after 2 today, and I wasn't aware of, that today a Pee Wee game at the stadium. So Middletown Pee Wee program is playing against, who was it, Princeton?
Yep.
Yeah, Princeton, rival of Middletown High School, Middletown for a long time. So families are there at the football game. This word went out. We got word from the city that they know. So we'll come back moving this thing forward. And, appreciate everyone here. You know, we have the exhibit. You got a chance to see our exhibit downstairs. We also have a timeline here that was put together, showing the history of Middletown. So what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is share this knowledge and tell people, okay, here's what we have. We do have a good relationship now with the Middletown City School District.
Good.
So, and that's where we're at. So,
And how many people have been here to the Freedom Zone? Okay. I just want you to know that every third and fifth Sunday now we are free. So from 11 to 5. And that's sponsored by Fifth Third Bank.
a little history about Freedom Zone, the slave pit.
Yes, we do have an original artifact there that came from Maysville, Kentucky. And it is called a slave pen. It is a jail. And it was owned by John W. Anderson. Mr. Anderson was originally from Virginia. He was a horse trader, and he joined the War of 1812, and he became a colonel. And after the war, he was given land in Kentucky. And because Kentucky already was filled with a lot of people buying and selling horses, he decided to buy and sell people. And so he built, and most people will look at it and think it was an enslaved house, but it does have bars on the windows. And that's the second slave pen that he owned. He owned the first one. He had a female in there by the name of Peggy. Peggy got out, she set the building on fire, and Peggy ran. But she got caught in Kentucky, and the state executed her for burning down Mr. Anderson's building, and they hung her. And then they paid Mr. Anderson $400, which is what he paid for Peggy. So what Mr. Anderson would do, if you've seen a slave pen, it is a 2-story building. So we took the second floor off. And the second floor was geared for the men 12 years and up, because those were the ones to be feared. And they were chained by the ankle. So if your ankle was chained here, you would be chained to the man next to you, and this ankle would be chained to that. And that's how you get people from Africa too. How you take all these people out of Africa and they not run away? You chain them, you put them in a coffer. You take a rope or a chain and you put it around their neck to connect to the second person's neck, and so on, till you had about 100 of them. But getting off the subject. So Mr. Anderson built the second one. And in 1834, so what he would do is twice a year, during the harvesting season and the planting season, he would have anywhere from 40 to 60 people in that building. Women were on the second floor, and they were cleaning up behind the men who were chained up on the top floor. So he would take them to Natchez, Mississippi. From Maysville, Kentucky to Natchez, Mississippi, 740 miles. They walked 20 miles a day for 35 to 40 days, and then they were sold in the cotton fields, the rice plantations, and the sugar plantations. That's me. And if you were a female and you were light colored, you were mulatto, you were sold in the brothels of New Orleans. So this is how he made a living. And in 1834, he had a man, so he would come in once a day, and he would let the men down to exercise them, because they had to make that journey. So he did that, and one of the men got out, and he got so far away from Mr. Anderson that he jumped on a horse to chase him down. The man ran through a cornfield that he had just chopped down, and you know what the cornfields look like, little stalks sticking out of it. Mr. Anderson on a horse chasing him, something in the cornfield spooked the horse and made the horse buck, and it threw Mr. Anderson off, and his head hit a corn stalk. He died instantly. He left behind a wife and 5 daughters, which means he had no heir. Women could not collect property in Kentucky at that time. He had a wife and 5 daughters, so the oldest daughter put an ad in the paper asking, is there any man out there willing to marry me? They can have my father's property if they promise to take care of my mother, my siblings, and myself. So she had to do that on a promise. So if she married the wrong man, he could have put her in her and there was nothing they could do about it. So when, she got married, there was about 32 people in that building. He decided that he wasn't gonna sell them, but he did not let them go. What he did was plant tobacco, and he hung the tobacco up in the last slave pen, which is what we have. And because it didn't have windows in it, it just had bars, he couldn't cure it. So he built a barn, instead of putting glass on it, he built a barn around it. And so that's what kept it. Fast forward 2001, 2003, this man buys his property, he's surveying the property, and he goes and he finds a building inside a building, and he's trying to figure out what in the world is this building is, and he starts asking neighbors. And guys, we know, our neighbors know all our business, even though if we don't think they do, they know. And so the neighbors started telling him what it is. He got in contact with us. We had a historian by the name of Mr. Carl Moreland. He passed away last year. He went to take a look at it, and he said, when I walked into it, that's the heaviness of the people just surrounded him, and the spirits, he said he failed, and he knew exactly what it was. He had to go to the county courthouse to prove this in order for us to bring it here. So he goes to the county courthouse, he asks for the information, he's there for a couple of hours, they come back and say, we don't have nothing like that. Mr. Westmoreland was tall, light-skinned, freckled face, big red afro. You remember Carl? So he said he came back, he was really disappointed that didn't happen. Then he started thinking, got that, they just don't wanna give it to me, a black man. So he finds a white teacher, asks her to go look for it. He said within an hour she came out with stacks like that. We even got the names of the people that was in that building when Mr. Anderson got killed. One of the names were Ghana, and another name was Israel, men's name, which we was like, what in the world? Those are not American names. You know, anytime you come from Africa, they're gonna change your name. So what we tried to figure out is that even though they outlawed the ships coming into America, it was still going into Brazil and Cuba. And the people of the white men in the South were hiring pirates to go raid those ships, to take those Africans off and bring them over to America, free labor again. They didn't have to pay for them. And we think Ghana and Israel got caught up with that, and they didn't get their name changed. So that's a little information about the slavery.
The slave pen that was found
Yes,
in the bottom of the barn.
in the barn, it was surrounded by the barn.
The pen was found by a classmate of mine that did barns. He redid barns all out. David Gaker.
Oh,
David Gaker, Kenny and Jan's classmate, our classmates at Middletown High School.
oh, really?
He was one, he would go around redoing barns, refurbishing barns, and found this slave pen in the bottom. David ended Westmoreland came to David's funeral.
Oh, okay.
David died of some kind of rare disease that he had contracted. Many of us thought that it was from him doing the barns.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, I
Probably
think
the
it's
leg paint.
I think some of the writing on the post is there, mentions his name, but it doesn't say he's from Middletown. His father was a doctor. Back to you.
You know when you said live, the abolitionary live up here, whatever. I went to Ohio State, the lady who was over our floor with girls, the resident advisory. She told me about